Hello, everyone. Well, I am back, Margo Lovett here, back with another conversation. One of the 25 powerful women that Na'ilah WomELLE has chosen, and she's just going to celebrate. If I can talk, I am so excited. There is no, I am totally excited about this conversation. So let me get that out of the way so I can settle down and talk. So, she is celebrating powerful women all of March, the entire month. And when I read about this lady, her contributions to us as the United States of America, what she's done, what she's doing, how she empowers women, and she is a powerhouse herself. Yeah, once you hear this conversation, you're going to be also, because this is one incredible lady. She is an Army veteran, yes, served as a legislative aide to U.S. Congressman John Lewis. That alone is just, historical. She's a Democratic strategist, and I want to introduce to everyone Na'ilah Amaru. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
I'm glad. We are going to dig right in because you are a Democratic strategist. That means that you have the pulse, the ear, what's going on, and this thing of politics. It's on every news channel every day. But before we really deep dive, I'd like for you to tell us, excuse me, you've dedicated your adult life to serving this country, protecting us, and helping the rest of us, our voices to be heard. So are you as enthusiastic about this work, being a Democratic strategist, the world of politics? You started 20 years ago. Are you still as enthusiastic about it today as you were, say, even 10 years ago?
I love that question. And the short answer is yes. I am just as passionate and hopeful for the world today as I started out, over 20 years ago. The nuanced answer, however, is yes, and also a lot more experienced. When I first started, embarking on grassroots organizing and building community power, a lot of it was really rooted in understanding that dismantling systems of oppression is a long game. And a long game never really, hits home until you've been doing this work for decades and you realize I have been pushing for these advocacy changes. I have been working in law and government and nonprofit, and oftentimes we are still fighting for the very same things that generations before us have been fighting. And, you mentioned, I am, a Congressman John Lewis alumna. And one of the many lessons I've learned from being in his presence and watching him and, working alongside him has been, the work is long, and that's the commitment and discipline of community organizing. And our work as organizers, as advocates, as strategists, as everyday people, in dismantling all the systems of oppression that we navigate every day, is to understand that it can be a long process, but also to find joy in knowing that every day we are not working alone. We are surrounded by fellow advocates and organizers and strategists and everyday people who are just as in love with this promise of America as I am. And that it is that shared North Star that guides us on oftentimes a very uncomfortable journey towards social justice, towards racial equity. And so, yes, Margo, I am just as passionate and just as hopeful because my belief in the promise of who we can be remains the same, although I have learned very important lessons along my way.
I'm so sure. The people that you've worked with. I like the idea that you say that it's long tail, it's the long game. And sometimes we lose sight of that. I myself, I've said, well, why are we still fighting inequality? I just had a conversation with someone about race reconciliation. Why are we still having these conversations? But it's the long game. And in the end, if you move to a mile, then that's amazing. That's a wonderful thing. And that's a mile that we would not have received and taken had people such as yourself not had the mindset and the work and dig in to do what you do. So thank you for serving our country also. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm wondering about, you talk about grassroots and working with the nonprofits and the communities. So my next question is, how important are nonprofits to our communities? Are nonprofits really the heartbeat and the blood of our communities when it comes to politics and policies being put into place?
Nonprofits are critical to the ecosystem of our communities. And I think through the lens of policy, politics, and power, it's a rather nuanced answer. So many of, folks in our communities benefit from the services, programs, and resources that nonprofits offer. However, through the political lens, nonprofits are very much impacted by the policies that are being passed and by budget decisions determining which nonprofit gets how much money, which types of programs get funded, why or why not. And there's oftentimes a racial gender lens that impacts those decisions that, again, directly impacts the people in our communities, particularly for those of us who belong to Black and Brown communities. So I think, the consequences are when there is a misalignment between government investment and community needs. And I think that's the overarching framework of what is the relationship between nonprofits, politics, and policy, is that nonprofits serve oftentimes our most vulnerable neighbors, but are not necessarily part of those government and legislative decision-making processes. And that creates, again, that disconnect that continues to perpetuate these harmful systems of government making policy decisions, government making budget decisions that impact nonprofit programs, services, and resources that then in turn have a direct and disparaging impact to Black and Brown communities. Again, repeating this really unfortunate cycle that is very difficult to break. But in terms of also organizing, I think that is the out, right? Of we all operate within all these different types of systems that are harmful. And oftentimes we are active and oftentimes we are, passive, but we are all participants in some way. And I think oftentimes the conversation when it comes to nonprofits, because legally, nonprofits cannot legally, they're very much limited to the type of lobbying and advocacy they can do because their sole role is to provide the services and to provide the resources and support directly. However, this also, again, goes back to when folks who are receiving those resources from nonprofits no longer receive those resources because of budget decisions, that's an opportunity for people in the community to organize and build power and force government to rethink the types of decisions that it makes. Now that people who have been historically marginalized and left out of those conversations have organized and built their sphere of influence to make government pay attention and invest in them.
Wow. Okay. I see the dynamics. I see how that runs. It is a system. What comes to my mind is this thing of COVID. Black and brown folks early on, healthcare, we don't get it the way that we should. So when we see these things going on in our communities, that's time for us to mobilize, get with our leaders on the local level, do you think? Or how do you set something like that up? I know it gets a little bit deeper, but how would a person begin this work?
Absolutely. So organizing is for everybody, right? And one of the things that I like to, try and share is oftentimes for those of us who belong to or come from communities that have been disenfranchised by government, we think about government in this abstract way, right? Like government is this thing over there that happens to us. And we don't necessarily view government as an opportunity to engage in policies. And I think, that is for fair reasons because of American history, right? The harm that government has intentionally caused to so many different types of communities. With that said, I think, when we begin to challenge our own understanding of power, what does it look like? Who has it? How do we build it? And we begin to challenge, again, this common definition that power is government, but then you think about government is people. Government is rooted in the power of the people per our Constitution. Yes. And without going into the history that you and I both know, that Constitution never included us. However, in the words that it proclaims is that it should. And so when we begin to think about, who is powerful, and begin to think about government as, this entity that only has its power because we allow it, we begin to think about the power that we hold. We begin to think about self-agency and empowerment, and how we as individuals are incredibly powerful through individual actions like going to the ballot box and casting our vote, or showing up at a town hall and becoming educated about the issues. Whatever that form of activism looks like, I think it's just so important that we make that connection of, power is dynamic and power is fluid, and power absolutely looks like us. And government is powerful because of us. And government, is not this strange, abstract, faraway entity that happens to us, but that we have a responsibility to be engaged and to be as active as we possibly can in the ways that we can, so that we are part of that process that impacts our lives every day. And so in the context of COVID, COVID has only illustrated what so many people have already known, right? The racial disparities of how who gets the resources and who doesn't. Even with the vaccine distribution, again, it's the same, right? Who is getting them first and who's not, right? What are the communities that have been most impacted but are still furthest in the back of the line, who still don't have access to the vaccine distribution? And so again, I think that the exciting part of this journey and thinking about power is recognizing for the first time that we have it, and that it's our power, and that we have this amazing ability to connect with our neighbors, to connect with our friends, to connect with our families, to connect with strangers in ways that we never would have imagined, but are connected because we're all fighting for that same thing, whatever that issue may be. And to me, that is the cycle of transitioning, thinking about power in a very masculine, traditional way that's very much rooted in white supremacy and patriarchy, to thinking about power is communal, power is collective, power is us working together to achieve the things that we need to get as a community to begin healing and to be building, so that we can be, again, that best vision of America that really is inclusive of we all the people.
Yes. Oh my goodness. We don't have to think about power as the government as happening to us. We need to engage with our government. We have a right to engage with our government.
Absolutely.
That helped my mindset, because it's kind of like, you fall into us and we, them and us, and who are these people? When I watch CNN, MSNBC, any of the news outlets, I am very discouraged about what I see concerning how polarized we are. And you who's right there in the thick of the fight, the grassroots, and your eyes and ears are on things that I know that I don't see. How polarized are we? Or is it just amped up? And where did we lose where did we get disconnected?
I think that, yes, we are very polarized, unfortunately. I think that also, thinking about where are those points of disconnection, I think it can be attributed to a few things. One, coming from the Capitol Hill perspective, And then also coming from like the grassroots organizing perspective, and also just the lens of like an everyday person just trying to make it in America in the skin we're in, right?
Yes.
So on the Hill, because we're living in a partisan system, Republicans and Democrats, I think oftentimes the way that our political system is structured as Republican, Democrat creates the us versus them type of feeling, right? And so if it's us versus them, then there can only be a winner and a loser. And so much of our political discourse feeds into, if I win, then you lose, but if you win, then I lose. And so that binary, really feeds into a level of ugliness of, winner takes all and nothing left. And so it really, compromises the ability for substantive conversations, particularly when we're talking about policy, right? Policy, there are nuances. Elected officials represent different types of districts that, are home to very many different types of Americans, right? And so I'm living in New York, which, is a lot different than back home in Georgia, right? Yes. Which is a lot different than where I went to school in Texas, or, when I lived in DC. And so I think oftentimes nuance is lost in these conversations because our system is so binary as us versus them. And so the polarization is just fed into, we must win and you must lose, or else, we all lose, as opposed to let's identify those points of agreement that we all can agree on and use that as a starting base to build from. But that's not the orientation, right? So thinking about that, framework from the community lens about polarization, is oftentimes, the same thing of the binary. Going back to government is this abstract concept, to, folks in the community wanting to organize. Again, oftentimes when I was an organizer, I was always organizing against the government, right? But I was never organizing with the government. And I think that's such an important distinction, again, because when we're talking about polarization and government's responsibility to, represent the interests of the people, and our responsibility as constituents or citizens, and, being engaged with the government, it was either or. It was, we're fighting back against government decisions, or government coming to us, telling us what it was going to do. But it was never a collaboration. It was never a partnership. It was always, this is what we're going to do, and then this is good or this is bad, but very seldom an in between, right? And so I think that lends again to this polarization of, what happens when we don't see the other side and we're not willing to engage and to work with the other side. And that's not to say, that we're, compromising or sacrificing principles, but really just trying to be intentional about where are those points of agreement that we can build from. So at the very least, we all get a little bit of something, right, in terms of what we're trying to work towards, as opposed to really going to war with each other and then potentially both of us walking away, empty-handed and, harmed in the process of oftentimes that are really ugly political fights.
Ugly. And that's the part that seems to be amplified. It's been amplified so long until Democrat, Republican, you just get sick of the whole thing. It seems to be one game, and who's listening to the people? Now, that's just my thought.
Absolutely.
Thank you for breaking that down, though, because I know that we've always had, everybody wants to get what they want to get, their agenda, let's push it. Let's make sure we get it. But there seems to be so vicious. It's such a vicious arena these days until it's just alarming. And it makes me as a voter wonder, well, what's really getting done? It's so vicious and oh my God.
Yes. Yes.
So, you know what, Na'ilah, I'm wondering about this thing with voter reform. I'm looking at the time. Boy, this time goes by so fast. Voter reform, it's on the news all the time. I was so happy to see what happened in Georgia. To me, that was grassroots at its best. Do you agree?
I do agree. Absolutely. I
Wow.
think that it's, I always say when it comes to voter suppression, attempts and practices, I am, I'm not surprised, but again, always disappointed when these things happen. Republican states, and conservative states deep in the South did the same thing, after, 2008 and 2012, when President Obama first won the presidency, tightened
Okay.
up the voting restrictions. And then when the Voting Rights Act, Section 5 was struck down back in 2013, which really protected the Voting Rights Act and gave it some teeth, was struck down. Then it really was open season. And what we have seen this year, I think, again, is just another illustration of what happened in the 2020 election of traditionally, safe Republican states, and specifically Georgia, which are traditionally, referred to as conservative or Republican, are no longer that way. It's a true battleground state. And so, in true, post-Reconstruction Jim Crow era type behavior and laws, Republicans will try to disenfranchise Black and brown voters by taking away access to the ballot box, while proclaiming it is in the name of election integrity, even though Black and brown voters voted in the system that Republicans designed and executed. And again, I think that just speaks to, again, the need for people to be aware of what is happening, but
Yes.
also drives home the power of the vote.
Mhm.
Right? Republicans, would not be trying so desperately to take away voting rights if it did not have an impact on electoral outcomes, but it does. And because electoral outcomes matter to who's literally representing us and how that has a direct impact on laws and policies that are being discussed, then again, I just think that it's a testament to the power of the vote.
Yes.
And to the power of community organizing, when communities rise up and say, you will not do this, you will not take away our right to vote. We will organize and we will mobilize and we will educate our neighbors, friends, and families and strangers so that they also know what's going on. Again, because the government is supposed to be governing in the public interest.
Mhm.
And our responsibility is to making sure that that public interest includes our perspectives and not just those who have traditionally held access to the halls of government power.
I totally agree. I shake my head. I think I shook my head more with your interview than with any. I totally agree. I see what's going on, and I see a great opportunity for women to make history. There's a lot going on, but in the media, as a strategist, consultant, what do you foresee women in these next couple of years? How can we really make a deeper footprint, push the needle, as they say, and what can we do as women and really matter in this world of I can't even formulate the question really. What can we do? Because it looks like everything is so over our heads for me sometimes, but it's really not. It really isn't. So what can we do?
I think that we can do what we have always been doing, Margo, which is doing the work, and doing the work in partnership, in deep partnership with each other, in service of the greater good for our communities. I think, oftentimes, as we, talked a little bit about before we went live, the work of Black and brown women has very rarely been recognized throughout history. But yet time and again, the impact of Black and brown women cannot be denied. Now, whether or not it is recognized publicly is a whole nother conversation. But just thinking about, my own background and our own histories and the legacies of amazing women that we come from, it is an honor to continue to do the work that so many women, generations before me, were already working in service of. And so I think it's important, what we can do as women in today's context, is again to honor those who have paved the path before us, and have made the work a little bit easier for us, as we continue to do the work, and we continue to do the work so it's a little bit easier, for the generations behind us. But also, I think what we as women can do, with the weight of the world on our shoulders, as women of color, who wear so many different titles and share so many different responsibilities, is to also give ourselves grace, which has been an important lesson, that I learned, later in life, in terms of we're so oftentimes driven by proving our worth to be productive and by achieving, certain goals in service of our communities. And, that's a good motivation. But at the same time, it cannot be the only motivation, particularly when, the work of organizing and advocacy is incredibly taxing psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, because there never is an off day, until we learn to take an off day, and that it's okay to take an off day and to love yourself and to take care of yourself. And it doesn't mean that we're selfish or that we're not thinking about others or that we're giving up the good fight. It just means that we are taking the time needed for us, to replenish and to heal, so that when we are ready, we can join back in the movement, fully restored in a way that we need to be in order for us, to continue to do the work that is not just in service of our communities for whom we sacrifice so much, but also in service of our greater selves, so that we can show up in this work in the ways that we need to, so that we are, again, balancing both, self-love and love for community in our work in trying to move towards social justice.
I just have to clap on that. I am so glad that you put that piece in, because the grind and the struggle is real, and all of that. Those are buzzwords that we hear all the time. But what about the strategists? What about the movers and the shakers that are really getting our voices out there? Love yourself, take time for yourself. Yeah. And I would even say, take time to celebrate yourself, because this is important work. Celebrate. I don't care if it's just an inch that was taken that day. Celebrate it, document it. Ah, my goodness. This has been Na'ilah Amaru. This has been fantastic. I tell you, I thank you a million times. Thank you for serving this country, for raising us all up. You raised my awareness just in this conversation, and I want to thank you for that. So glad that you are one of the 25 women that WomELLE magazine is honoring the month of March. Well deserved. And gosh, let's just, I hope we have another conversation, because it seems like long tail, long term. We're not at the end of this fight yet. We're not at the end. There's always another rock to throw. There's another piece of dirt to dig up and put somewhere else. So I hope that we have an opportunity to have another conversation. So it's always hard for me to end up these conversations, but I'm Margo Lovett, and I have to cut it off right here. So wow, I'll see everybody on the next conversation. Thank you, Na'ilah, and everyone else. Take care. I will see you on the next conversation. Bye-bye now.